Well, welcome everybody, and welcome to the FEG International Special Interest Group. Glad to have you.
So I was actually part of the original IBM Watson team. That was the supercomputer that played Jeopardy and beat the two top champions at the time. And that was really the first sort of instance of AI. We was playing Jeopardy, but it was considered the trigger for the current AI wave that we're in. So I've had the pleasure of building several ecosystems, working with a lot of different companies and government agencies to actually build solutions, including a lot in financial services as well as legal services. So today I serve as the United Nations AI advisor. I've helped build their ecosystem as well as start the AI for Good initiative, which is a solutions-based initiative around the Sustainable Development Goals. But that's not why we're here. We're here to have some fun. So let me share my screen. So while we were talking about international arbitration and something we were actually chatting about earlier, like I'm not sure how this topic came up, I have done a lot of work in financial services. I'll try and weave in some of that work in. And if you have questions along the way, please do type them in the chat room. I'll have time saved at the end so guys can ask questions. So if it's not about international arbitration, that's quite all right. Stuff about investment banking, private equity, banking in general, accounting, all that is fair game. Done work across the board there. But with that, well, let's get started with revolutionizing justice here because legal services, and my apologies to any lawyers, is the second slowest moving industry I have ever seen. And one of the things that the United Nations is actually very big about is AI robot judges. So the belief is this will help us kind of work through these big backlogs we have in our court system, reduce corruption, and it'll improve access to justice. And if you've ever noticed a lot of sci-fi TV shows and movies, it always seems like the judges are robots anyways. Question becomes is, can we actually do something like this? And for AI to work, it actually needs data. That's the fuel for it. And so if you look at the US court system, we actually have a lot of data. The question is it actually good data? So let's take a look at what it would take to train AI judges here. We can give it hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cases to study. But is the data biased, particularly implicit bias? Well, here's the story of two young gentlemen, Brock Turner and Corey Beatty. They were both 20-year college students at the time, both football players that unfortunately hooked up with a drunk woman and were convicted of rape of an unconscious person. Now, there's a lot of similarities between these two guys. But the AI is going to look at this and say, like, why did Brock only get 6 months of jail time and Corey Beatty got 15 to 25 years? You can start looking, say, like, okay, what are the difference between these two guys? Same age, both college, okay, one Stanford, one LSU, does that make a difference? But it's probably going to zone in and say, okay, they're different ethnicities. Let me look at these other cases and see if people of different ethnicities, same crime, similar circumstances, not different conviction sentences. And I'll probably see a pattern there. Unfortunately, it's going to learn that bias and replicate it. And that's one of the big challenges that we have, because AI will pick up on our bad habits. We don't program AI, we teach it. We give it something called ground truth, which are rules on how to make decisions. But it studies like court cases or financial documents, all these things to kind of wire its own neural network. The AI creates its own algorithms. And then part of this algorithm, unfortunately, is going to be to realize that people of different ethnicities should deserve different sentences for some reason. However, this isn't actually the biggest bias that we actually found when it comes to the court system. When it comes to digital data, the biggest bias present is actually how hungry the judge is. We actually did study this, we did benchmark it, and regrettably, the hungrier a judge is, the more harsh in their sentence and ruling. So if you ever want to go to court, you probably want to do it after lunch. The question becomes, though, how do we manage or strip out that bias? And the truth is we've learned we really can't remove all bias. You have to learn to live with some of it. In this particular case, we thought like, okay, Could we look at timestamps? If there are timestamps available, maybe we can make some, adjustments. But then we don't know if that judge ate breakfast that day or if they had a large or small lunch. Everyone has different metabolism, different blood sugar levels. So short of attaching a machine to measure blood sugar levels in real time, there's no way to actually strip out this bias. That's one of the big challenges that we face when it comes to AI. However, we do look at things that, like, what could we do? Things with minimum variation, right, that are more standardized. That's more ripe for AI and has less of this bias problem. If you look on the kind of the left side of my slide here, this is actually AI arbitrator that China created. So they had a huge backlog of cases. They started a whole virtual courtroom to remove physical constraints. They actually created an AI arbitrator that can listen to 10,000 arbitrations at the same time. So you can see these people are actually, pleading their case, or their lawyers are pleading their case, and the AI is actually making those decisions. So we've reached some level of that. Same thing like Estonia. They realized that for their traffic court, 90% of the cases were very similar. So for 10% of the cases that have something unusual going on, they kick off that to a human judge. But for the other 90%, they actually give it to an AI robot judge. So it's interesting to see that, well, a lot of people that walk in and see the robot suddenly plead guilty, but they were able to repurpose those other judges to more impacted areas like family law. So we're already starting to see some level of this, start to happen, at least with arbitration. And this really boils down to truth and trust in the technology. The reason some of these things aren't happening faster, even though the capabilities might be there, is that do we really trust the technology, right? We're very hung up on the fact that it might make a mistake. The honest truth is it's going to. It has human teachers, data is biased and flawed, but it's not a question of we'll ever make a mistake. It's a question of the human and AI working together. Is that more accurate than we actually have today? And to kind of hammer this point home, I want to take us back to the 14th century and the invention of the printing press. So when this new technology first came out, people actually wanted to ban it and destroy the existing machines because they believed the printing press would destroy all human knowledge. Now, we kind of chuckle about that because it had the opposite effect, right? It brought knowledge to the masses. It created the need for books and literacy, which created the need for schools. And I think we're going through a similar time right now where we see a lot of the bad news. And don't get me wrong, there's things to be concerned about when it comes to AI and some other emerging technology. But we need a nudge to actually look at some of the good uses where we can create some value and actually help people. And that's where the trust factor really comes in. And it's tough because in human history, this slide I have up here, I know it's super busy, but it shows the timeline of the major inventions throughout human history. So I just want to call out two quick things here. One, people discovered how to use controlled fire for cooking about 1 million years ago, but we didn't actually invent agriculture until about 9,000 years ago. So a lot of time lag. We're good about reacting to things and, lots of observation. But if you look at the second thing, you notice that we're seeing an onslaught of technological innovation in the last 40 years. In fact, the last 40 years has shown more technological innovation than the previous 1,000,000 years. And this is not going to change. We call AI the trigger for the fourth industrial level revolution. This has triggered a state we now call hyperchange, where we're experiencing 100 years worth of change in just 10 years. So if you're thinking like, well, I'll wait for things to settle down, I'll see some of the stuff become more mature, or you're just trying to think about using AI right now, you're actually about 3 years behind the curve. That's how quickly things are already moving. So diving back into sort of the legal world here for a second. Second slowest moving industry, already seen an explosion in the last 2.5 years of AI tools coming out. Legal research, due diligence, billing, time tracking, predicting case outcomes, leveraging the forged language capabilities for international negotiations and arbitration, And the great thing about AI is it remembers everything it sees, does, hears, experiences, eidetic memory. So it can read every tax law, every law, regulation, policy out there from any country, municipality, and remember that and bring that forward as as an assistant to our work. In fact, if you've ever tried to read the tax code, it's a lot. I actually worked with H&R Block a few years ago. They realized about two-thirds of the tax returns were very standardized. So we had AI taught it about tax law. We had to read all the tax code for every municipality, state, federal level, and we had to prepare some tax returns. So we do the work, ask the client a few questions, review the documentation, and the human account just review the work, make sure everything looked all right. But one thing we noticed was the average refund was $236 higher. We're like, why is that happening? Are we making some sort of mistake here? We started looking at it and we realized, oh, it recognized this very remote or arcane tax credit of $25. It knew this person qualified for a $50 rebate. So all these little minutia things is bringing forward to create more value. So in the world of law, it surprises me how many lawyers and even law students have never been in the courtroom. But now we're seeing that they're using like these AI tools to do prep work. Only typically the big mega firms can afford like a mock courtroom and practice case strategy and jury selection. Thanks to AI and the metaverse and a little bit of cognitive science, they're doing this now virtually. And they can try jury selection. They can upskill junior lawyers. They can practice arguing with co-counsel, cross-examining witnesses, presenting different case strategies to a judge and see what happens. That's the power that AI is really helping out with is scenario planning. And this is having an interesting effect. And I apologize for the quality of the graphic. It's from LexisNexis, not unfortunately the greatest. But the takeaway here is you're seeing this real push now within law firms, small to big, about the use of AI, particularly generative AI. It's putting pressure now on the skill sets they're looking to hire for out of law school, which has in turn now put pressure on law schools to change their curriculum and what they're really teaching. And now we're starting to see the ripple effect into the bachelor degree programs for those people that want to study pre-law, and even to the level since infancy in high school of about prepping people for those bachelor's programs. And it's not just law that's happening. I see this in business and finance and marketing, even biological sciences and physics and all so forth, so all these different areas. So it's going to have a tremendous impact on our work as well as workforce development. And that's why I wanted to kind of talk about one of the biggest questions I know a lot of people have. So this is an actual billboard I saw in Los Angeles. My wife was driving, so don't worry about me taking the picture. But I thought it was interesting that robots can't take your job if you're already retired. Are we just capitulating? Or have we just given up? I hope not, but I know the big question is, will AI take my job? I hear it a lot. And I've worked with a lot of companies that they came in hoping to put in some AI, particularly automation tools to reduce headcount. And I can tell you that none of them actually reduced the headcount, right? They found more complex work, more value-added work for those people to do instead. So ultimately, AI is not going to replace you, but a person that's using AI will. And that actually is happening. The people using these AI tools are rising up. And so this is now becoming no longer an edge, but a must-have. So not using AI will actually impair your career, impair your ability to actually get clients. So this really takes me to the key point. This is true for every industry. This is not about human versus machine. This is not natural intelligence versus artificial intelligence. We're really moving to a state of what we call hybrid intelligence. Look, AI is great at math, statistics, crunching millions upon millions of variables, doing it quickly, cheaply. There's a lot of things that people do much better than AI. We're good at dealing with first of kind situations, situations that require creative and critical thinking, things that there's an element of intuition or understanding kind of the irrationality of people. We're really moving to a future we call hybrid intelligence. We're really augmenting our human capabilities with machine abilities. Can I give you an example of this? So I mentioned, legal has been starbursting out, a lot of focus on operations, other things. There's actually a startup company in Los Angeles called Legal Nation. So started by three lawyers, non-technical. And I remember, one of them was an alumnus, full alumnus with me, just asking some questions over lunch. And I said, look, the best AI solutions actually come from domain experts, right? Would you let Elon Musk perform open heart surgery on you? Probably not. So if you're counting on like Elon or Jeff Bezos, one of these guys to, create a solution for you, they're not going to because they don't know your pain points. They don't understand your work. But taking that advice to heart, these three guys went back and started thinking about their work. So they're defense, litigation lawyers, and IP law. And one of the things they realized is there's some standardization and there's a fair amount of kind of tedious grunt work in responding to a complaint. So if someone sues you, they file a complaint. They built an AI associate lawyer that will then read that complaint, generate the corresponding court documents, start generating a cross complaint if it's warranted, start preparing deposition questions, start doing some initial research into case strategy. So it would normally take an associate lawyer about 3 years of experience, on average 10 to 12 hours to do. This AI does it in 2 minutes. So produces all this. It's always a draft with AI. The human lawyer spends about 30 minutes reviewing, correcting anything that might seem to be wrong, filling any gaps, give a little polish. Now, you're probably wondering why there's a chicken on this slide. If you didn't notice, upper right-hand corner, one of their clients is Walmart. And they had a case, ironically, the guy was a dentist, where he bought a whole chicken, bit in the gizzard, chipped his tooth on a stone. So sues Walmart for damages. Normally, I don't know, Walmart might pay out of pocket. I don't know how much, 25, 30,000 or something like that, just to be done with the headache. But in this particular instance, because they're using this AI associate lawyer, it does its work. And part of its case strategy, it actually comes out and says, it's a material fact that when chickens eat, they actually eat stones and they get stored in the gizzard. So the plaintiff buying a whole chicken should have been aware of the risk of trying to eat the gizzard. That argument won Walmart the case. They didn't have to pay any money, and moreover, they actually got reimbursed for their legal fees. So it's like we're all looking at this going, how in the world did it know that? There's nothing in its training data or the ground truth around chickens or stones. I went to 4 of the 5 top mega firms, asked this to your partners, would your attorneys have figured this out? And they're like, not unless it was they were a chicken farmer. And that's really the power of AI when it actually comes to bear here. So this is a great example of hybrid intelligence. It helped kind of flesh out this argument. Human lawyers figured out how to best use that in the courtroom to help their client. Now, AI has also created a lot of other situations. So things that we're trying to figure out, particularly in litigations, such as personhood. Like, do AI robots have rights? Does AI have rights? Are they considered people? And while these are great thought exercises, unfortunately, Saudi Arabia surprised all of us in 2017 and gave Sophia the robot citizenship. So before women could even drive, they gave a robot that identifies as female personhood. So Sophia has a Saudi Arabian passport. The questions like, well, does Sophia need to get paid? Is she entitled to health care? Someone's kind of working on her, touches them in an inappropriate place. Is that like sexual harassment? But even drawing that down to something more mundane like IP law, the U.S. Patent Office has said that, well, machines can't be inventors. So if an AI creates something, then the person that created the AI is really the inventor. However, the European Patent Office said, nope, machines can be inventors. And so as a result, they have a reciprocal agreement, but they're in conflict now on that and who can be an inventor. So, and this is what we're happening. Just about a month ago, the first UAE robot came out. They were showcasing it off on a news conference, and the robot made an unfortunate gesture. And it was a question of, is this sexual harassment? Does AI understand sexual harassment? Was this taught to the AI? Was it an accident? Did something else happen? Was it a glitch? So a lot of questions that we need answers for, but we don't have anything for at the moment. And this is just the challenges that we have. We have really four big challenges. The first is the data. We don't have the data to teach the AI, we can't actually do anything. So you need it, and you need good, clean data for that. Second is you need the subject matter experts. People always underscore the training when it comes to AI. Like I mentioned, it's not programmed, it's taught. So you need the domain experts, the business experts to actually do this. I worked with a VC firm. They wanted to create an AI tool to help with due diligence. Well, most software engineers, most machine learning programmers don't know how to review a cash flow statement or analyze a staffing plan or customer acquisition growth costs or, even just physical hard costs. They really need the VCs and the financial analysts to help them understand how you actually do some of these things. So you need to have a subject experts available to teach AI. And third is the bias factor, as we talked about, especially the implicit or unconscious bias that tends to weave its way in. Now, interestingly enough, I believe everything has a mirror image. Every opportunity has a threat. Every threat has an opportunity. So you take mortgage loans, for example, the HUD is on the verge of mandating that mortgage lenders use AI to review and approve or reject home loan applications and set the rate. And when we wondered, like, why is that, right? Well, we found that even if you blind out the name, a human reviewer will still make inferences from the person's job, neighborhood they're currently living in, neighborhood they're trying to move into, so many things. For AI, it's just a math equation, right? That's all it's doing. And what we found as a result is that a lot of the underserved populations with AI are getting approved more often and usually at a lower interest rate. It's ironically an opportunity to strip some bias out of the mortgage lending system. The fourth challenge is we have to understand is that machines actually think differently. So there was an example a few years ago where Facebook wanted to play around with their AI, showcase something. They created two versions of their Messenger AI bot, and they basically had them talk to each other about system optimization. And they went from English chat to about this gobbledygook in about 15 minutes. Freaked out the engineers, literally pulled the plug, wonder what's going on. You know, is this the Skynet coming or something like that? And for a couple of weeks, they're spinning the wheels, and I got a call from one of them. And so we're talking about it, and I said, well, have you talked to a linguist? And they're like, why would I talk to a linguist? Again, this is why the domain expertise is so important. That you're asking 2 AI systems to have a conversation, right? You probably say that's some gobbledygook. You probably have a linguist look and see if they can figure out what's going on. So Facebook's credit, they called up a couple of linguistical experts. They took a look at everything that happened, and they realized that the AI systems realized that English was too cumbersome to actually use. And since they were talking about system optimization, they decided to figure out a better way to communicate with each other to improve performance. And so they effectively created their own shorthand. So machines think differently. And unfortunately, we also have technologists working on stuff they don't fully understand. Another example of this, there was a guy in his Tesla. He had the autopilot on because he was watching a Harry Potter movie. No joke, was watching Harry Potter. So he never noticed this truck had wiped out on the highway and the truck bed was blocking the road. Unfortunately, the autopilot didn't recognize that either. So ran right through the truck bed, ripped the top of the car off. And everybody's like, whoa, why did this happen? What happened here? Well, we were looking at this and we realized that it was a cloudy day and the truck bed was a gray, similar kind of color. The truck bed just blended into the kind of the horizon, the background there. So the cameras never picked it up. And we're going like, man, if we were using radar, this never happened. And we started thinking to ourselves, like, wait a second, why aren't we using radar? Why are we relying on cameras? Well, that's because as human beings, we drive with our eyes, right? Visual input. And all we did was replicate that, try to automate that. Not the best use of using AI capabilities, right? today's generation, with the exception of Tesla, ironically, these self-driving cars do use radar. They use LiDAR. They actually use auditory sensors because we know you can hear that little kid about to run across the street before you see the little kid run across the street. We're using IoT, Internet of Things sensors in the cars and the ground and landmarks and traffic lights. These self-driving cars are literally processing over 1,000 data points per second in real time. They're driving in a way that no human can actually do that. Machines think differently. Now, I know a lot of people talk about the trolley problem, right? Like, what if you have to hit one of two people and all these kinds of things? It's a 1 in a billion chance of happening. And I'm not saying it's not important, but the thing we tend to overlook is that 20 million people around the world every year either die or suffer permanent horrific injury in car accidents. We did a study in the United Nations showing that we could reduce this number by about 95%. That's 19 million lives per year saved by taking advantage of all this extra information in driving. So in the UN, we don't talk about when do we legalize autonomous vehicles. We actually talk about when we ban human drivers because we as people actually create the most variability in the system. That's the most risk, particularly the dangers. Now, sliding back to arbitration here for a second, right? What we're seeing today is they're using AI for document analysis work. That's one very common thing. So all the documents, pictures, pieces of evidence, deposition, all these things, the AI can actually analyze that, synthesize that, formulate arguments from that. Actually see a very similar thing now in private equity and investment banks for the due diligence for a merger acquisition or for an IPO or for, just even a LBO to actually leverage AI in a similar type of way through document analysis work. We also see AI being applied now for what we call concept-based search. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead for deposition analysis. So we can actually have AI listen in or at least read a transcript of a deposition and draw knowledge from that. So while the lawyer's asking questions and looking for visual clues, can mix things up, but we've been able to teach AI uh, psychology as well as neurolinguistics, which is the science of language. So language is unique. It's like a fingerprint. We can actually look through this using these two capabilities and identify subtle clues that then the law team can actually leverage. So we actually had a case where there was a bishop in the Catholic Church. He was being deposed, and we felt like he knew who the guilty people were, unfortunately, of child sexual abuse, and he's trying to protect them. And so, we're combing through the deposition, trying to see any clues, but we had the AI do the same thing. One of the things that noticed was that depending on who he was referencing, it seemed like if he wasn't sure if the person was innocent or guilty or knew they were innocent, he would use a term like colleague or friend. But if he knew they were guilty, he would use the word fellow. And drawing upon this insight that helped us kind of build a case, look for evidence, you know, try to support that, and turned out that everyone the AI identified that that guy was protecting turned out to actually be guilty. That's the power in like deposition analysis, language analysis. They're also using it in concept-based searching. So we're used to traditional keyword search. If you've never tried it, I suggest you do this. Not necessarily right now, but go to Google and type in show me restaurants near me, but not pizza. You'll often get a bunch of pizza places because it sees the keyword pizza. It doesn't understand contextually what you're trying to say, the concept. And that's what a lot of people in legal services now are doing, are using AI for concept-based savings. So like I don't have to say all the types of warm clothing, for example. It's going to understand that sweater, jacket, coat, overcoat, all these things are references around concept of warm clothing. So it helps identify more information, better quality information faster. And then we're also seeing this kind of synthesis. So, the average doctor only has about 5 hours a month to read latest medical journals, articles, as well as clinical trial studies. Not a whole lot of time because there's a ton of information being generated. So we're seeing more and more doctors, lawyers, financial analysts turn to AI to read through everything that they call a trusted source, which is currently published every day, and essentially create an executive summary of the key information they would be interested in. And if a person wants to dive more into something, the AI can either take them to the exact areas they should be looking at, or call up the article, or do something else. So it's interesting that this is becoming not just, here's a bunch of information, we can turn this into a conversation, or we can have a back and forth with the AI to get the information you're looking for. And lastly is now the visualization of data, of information. Most people are visual learners. So like in international arbitration, you've seen through the document analysis, some of these other things, the AI can actually take things and create visuals out, like even create like a timeline of what occurred, during whatever transpired that the two parties are, arguing over. So there's a much better way now for us to consume a multitude or large quantities of data thanks to AI. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now, not just legal services. Second slowest moving industry. I know some of you are wondering what the first slowest moving industry is. It's accounting. But I've seen a lot of push in the last 12 months in the accounting world towards the development of AI tools. So as I mentioned, people using AI are the ones that are going to take your jobs, going to take your clients. You got to be ready for that. You're not going to find a lot of off-the-tool shelf things. A lot of people use like APIs, or they build some of their own proprietary stuff, because again, you have to teach AI. And if nothing else, you have to teach it the way you do financial services, your business processes. But it can be a very powerful tool and ally in your work. I want to make sure I save time for questions. If for some reason we don't have time to get to your question, my website on here does have a contact form. These are some of my socials. There's a great source of information called a newsletter called Disrupting the Box on LinkedIn. Cares about that. If you take a picture of the slide, if you want to scan the QR code real quickly and give some feedback, I greatly appreciate that. Yes, I'm stalling for a little time to give you a chance to take a picture, scan the QR code. But I hope this has been helpful and useful. And let's open it up now for question and answer. Well, if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself. And I'll try and look through the chat here.
We had a question. What is the slowest moving industry?
Yeah, it's the slow moving industry is actually accounting. It's accounting. So for your accountants, I apologize, but that's unfortunately the benchmark. And it makes sense, accounting and legal services, because there's a lot of concern about liability. Does anybody have any other questions? They don't have to be about legal services or international arbitration. You can ask questions about financial services, which is what I would have expected as the topic for FANG. I don't see any questions. Chris, Charlotte, I think they're gonna let me off easy.
Yeah, I think just I have a daughter who works a lot with AI, and I've done a little bit, but I think what ends up happening with a lot of people is when they're introduced to this kind of thing, they're trying to get a feel for what's happening and what isn't happening, and get through the noise of what it really is. And to some extent, I think, in my experience anyway, that hinders people asking specific questions, because they got more general questions about what are we talking about in the first place.
There's a lot going on, so maybe I'll share a story. So I alluded to this kind of due diligence tool this I helped this VC firm build. So the PGA Pro Golf Association asked me to give a speech at a private reception they were hosting for a bunch of investment bankers and private equity firms. And so I was talking a lot more about how it was actually AI is actually being used in their space. And I shared this example of the VC fund and what it's done for them in terms of reviewing financial projections. So it's cut down the amount of work they need to spend on that by 30 40%. It's become a great triage tool because they'll run through the AI first to see if they even invest any time really trying to even dig into this opportunity. And what it's doing, it's looking at all the traditional stuff about revenue and does that make sense, kind of customer growth, industry benchmarks, assumptions, staffing, right? It flags things for people to review. But I remember that when Q&A started after that presentation, everybody had their hand up and they basically had the same question. Where do I buy that tool from the venture capitalists? And I said, it is not for sale. They do not sell it. They think it's a huge competitive advantage. They both run proprietary AI to do that. And they've been using it for almost a year and a half. And I think that shocked people that they've been doing that for that long. And I said, look, if you feel like this kind of tool is going to help add value, I can help you understand how to build your own. It's not expensive, it's not an arduous process, but you have to commit people to train the AI system. And I think that was an eye opener for a lot of people. Well, not that this was possible, but that their competitors were already doing it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and the other experience I have, just to throw in, is that I've used I've used AI models. I do a lot of writing, and I do a lot of translation work in several languages, and used AI models to do a little bit of both. But in both cases, it's a great start. It's a great It gets a lot of the tedious work out of the way, but it still needs to be reviewed. As it gets better, then you have fewer problems. But uh, just like anything with computers, it gets a lot of the repetitive, tedious stuff out of the way. But humans still have to go through and clean it up and make sure, and that changes over time. It gets better and better as you teach it.
Absolutely, Chris. And that's why I always say that whatever AI produces for you, you have to treat it like a draft, right?
Right.
Some of that, we talk about like the hallucinations of generative AI, like ChatGPT. Some of that we have to understand is that we're asking ChatGPT to do things it's never been taught. So as a result, it's going to just come up with some gobbledygook. Other times, it's because we actually don't have a good prompt. So we've heard these stories of, you know, people trying to do their bio, for example, and ChatGPT thinks they're a serial killer from Medellin, Colombia. True story. Or it's creating, cases to cite in court that don't exist. We have to understand that the AI doesn't understand some of these things. If it thinks you're a serial killer from Colombia, you might have a very common name, which is what happened in that case. You have to provide more information to kind of narrow it down so it knows who you are. And
Right.
parameters like where you work, where you went to school, what kind of jobs you have, something like that, then helps the AI produce better output for you. Same thing,
Right.
the court cases. I talked to some of those lawyers that were busted for that, and their prompt was essentially like, give me 3 legal cases I can cite in court that will strongly support my case strategy, right? Problem is while we all understand if you're going to use something in court, it has to be real and true. The AI doesn't actually know that, right? And so it's like, well, okay, you need really strong cases to support your strategy. I'll just create them for you. Right? It doesn't know they have to be real. You change your prompt and say, please research and identify, 3 cases that would, help support my strategy. It would actually come up with some different output for you. So it knows that's to find something that's real. And that's one of
Right.
the things that we struggle with. Prompt engineering is not a job. It's a skill set, and it's a skill set everyone's going to have to know.
Yeah.
I see
Um,
there's,
we
So
have a couple. Go ahead.
I'm
just
sorry.
actually a couple of
If there are
questions.
others that have questions first, I didn't put anything in the chat.
Yeah, there are a couple of things in the chat. I was gonna. It says, well, first one, can you please go back and put up the slide for the contact information before we get out of here? Next one says, where are we currently on financial reporting by using AI development? How can we convince the upside of AI in helping in finance and accounting area over taking their jobs? Okay, and then it says,
It's
management,
interesting.
they may be excited on AI and getting the financial report faster, more accurate.
So it's interesting that from financial reporting, This actually started about 5.5, maybe 6 years ago with greenwashing. So you actually had some NGOs and nonprofits, actually a couple of government agencies, including the EPA, start building AI tools to read through financial statements, like the quarterly reports, the the annual filing statements, even the footnotes and all those things that people tend to gloss over, to see, are they actually hitting the ESG targets they claim they're doing? Are they actually having the sustainable impact they're claiming, or is it just kind of greenwashing? And it actually showed 80% of the companies were greenwashing. But that proved to be an interesting use case, because then you started seeing some other companies, as well as organizations like the Fed and all that, start building their own tools for audit and compliance purposes. So that whole document analysis we we're kind of talking about, they actually do that now as part of their audit process to see if you're actually in compliance or not. And so as a result, I've seen the companies either looking for or building their own AI tools to do their own internal audits to see how compliant they are and to flag things if they're non-compliant. So there's a fair amount of maturity on using AI for, reviewing financial reporting. There's talking now about, could AI look at, things like bank account statements, portfolio performance, things like that, and actually produce some of the reports. So again, it'd be drafts. So we still have to kind of fine tune and look at it. That's actually the next wave we're actually seeing in this. And at least from the audit compliance standpoint, it's had a significant impact. I think it's reduced like 42% of the effort hours put into the process. And they're able to actually look at a much deeper level at the financial reporting. Again, it's AI looking at things and flagging things for a human to review, not making a decision itself.
Right. So, who was it that had a question? Go ahead. A second ago.
Yeah, I have a kind of a question and a statement. So most of us are going to be consumers of AI versus producers. We're not going to, most of us going to be developing large language models and coders and all of that, right? So already there's a lot of misinformation out there, and now they're scraping the web and everything else to bring together all this information for us. And there's a lot of, there are legal cases, I suppose, now where likenesses are being reproduced, like what's her name, Scarlett Johansson and all of that. What are the legal implications? Number one, what are the legal implications when data comes back that is wrong, and we use it? And how do we determine what's misinformation and what's not? How do we protect ourselves as consumers?
So great questions, Carolyn. So from a data standpoint, that really, the liability really falls upon the person that brought the data into the AI system. So you're right, most of us are not building the tools. So if you look at like a LLM, there's some base version of it, the company like Perplexity or OpenAI or Microsoft is providing to you. If that data is flawed, then the liability is actually on them. And that's a big issue, because that means every version they provide to people has the same flaw.
Oh, that's interesting. I wasn't aware.
Yeah, so there's not one ChatGPT. There's 2.5 billion versions of ChatGPT, right? So especially if you're paying for it, you have your own private instance. So your data, your models, your algorithms are all your own. Nobody else can see or access them, and vice versa. You can't see anybody else's.
Well,
But
what if you're not paying for it? Isn't it free?
There's a free version, but that's the base version,
Mm.
right? That's the base version. So if you're paying for it, you have the base version plus your own stuff. If you're using the free version, you just have the base version. But that means if there's a problem in the base version, everybody has the same data problem. It's a big issue. Now, if you're doing something specialized, let's say you're building a tool to help do risk assessment for clients that are, saving for a house or saving for a kid's college education or something like that, they want to do investing. If there's a flaw in the data there, a flaw in the ground truth, then the liability is on you. Because that's something you brought in to this instance, and you create your own models around it. So there's two different levels of data liability here. Now, when it comes to
sorry. If you bring something in and then you write something and it's flawed, then it's on you, you're saying.
right, yeah, anything you bring in yourself to the tool, if that's flawed, then the liability is on you.
Hmm.
Now, when it comes to misinformation, sorry, I just want to make sure I answer both questions. When it comes to misinformation or malinformation, unfortunately, data has been weaponized. So we've seen tons of instances. I mean, even the EU Parliament elections going on. There's over 1,000 instances of like deep fake audios, um, fake news. Even for the Olympics coming up, we saw the whole thing with Russia around fake security, fake environmental stuff. So that's the problem, right? Part of that is on us as people to do a little bit of due diligence and seek, we call it contrary or negative testing. The other thing is what we've learned is the way people communicate, and this includes machines as well, has a unique signature to it, like a unique fingerprint. You have a style. And what we've been able to do is start teaching AI systems to look for those styles so we can identify, is this actually generated by the person who claims it is because we have what their style is, or was it created by a machine? And
So is there legal recourse I mean, I don't even know who you would sue, but like,
so there's partnerships with like Interpol and the FBI to try and track some of these things down, but it happens so frequently. It can be tough unless it's a major thing. It's be tough to do, and then tracking and finding these guys is also difficult. The best we can hope for is really trying to shut it down before it goes viral, and that can be a challenge in this day and age where we're seeing people being less receptive to different viewpoints and perspectives from their own.
thank you. Very interesting.
One thing I was going to just add that might be helpful. You're talking about Chat GPT, and so there's a million versions of it, and a lot of companies are compiling their own sets and using their own data sets. And so, a case in point, Bloomberg, the financial information company, they've got their own version, and since they've got years and years of history, they haven't made that publicly available for anybody to scan and do themselves. You can get to the information, but you got to pay Bloomberg to use their AI tool to dig through that data, which makes sense. I mean, they're the ones that compiled it in the first place.
That's why we say data is the new oil.
Yeah. Charlotte says, I just learned from my son, first came spam, now with AI, we've got slop.
Can we get a copy of your presentation, Neil?
Yeah, I'll make sure I'll give that to Charlotte so she can share that with everybody.
Thank you.
Can you go ahead and put your contact slide up while we're talking? Anybody else got any questions?
Of course.
Thanks.
Neil, I know you have to leave pretty promptly. I'm interested in your view on how effective AI is at stripping out ambiguity. And I think at the moment, the most famous piece of ambiguity is probably Henry Kissinger acknowledging what China was proposing over Taiwan, God knows how many decades ago. But of course, the word acknowledge has two meanings. It can mean you accept, or it means I understand your position. Kissinger, of course, was saying, I understand your position, not I accept the fact that we're going to have one China. And perhaps that's one of the most famous cases of ambiguity with the recently retired commander of Asia Pac sort of recently saying it's time to abandon ambiguity removal and go to ambiguity clarity. Does AI have a role in all that stuff?
But only to a degree. It's not like AI can just strip out any ambiguity. But one things we've seen is, I mentioned, we've been able to teach AI psychology, neurolinguistics. We've also been able to teach it psychographics. And so there are some cases, and so there are some kind of like brokerage houses and I guess I call it banks that offer investment services, where they've taken AI to a new tack to try and address the real risk tolerance of a client. So, no more about like you consider yourself aggressive, these kinds of things. We'll prompt them with kind of some scenarios that really have nothing to do directly sometimes with investment, but because it has these things, it can actually infer the intent of the person. And because some of it seems kind of, call it, quizzical, it's hard for people to disguise their language over time, and so they've been able to get a much accurate sense of a person's real risk tolerance. Because we've probably all experienced it when the market is booming. You tell people like, well, if I had this thing, if it could go up 20% or go down 20%, oh no, I'd totally go for it. But in reality, when it goes down 20%, they freak out, right? They want to panic sell. But that's one example of where they've been able to strip out some level of ambiguity in financial services. We're actually leveraging a lot of stuff for mental health right now. Treating people with PTSD, people suffering from depression, anxiety, that we found that, because often they'll say like, I'm not sure, I don't know why this is happening. A little bit of AI coaching in partnership with a therapist has been able to kind of get more to the heart of the matter and identify the areas to actually focus on for people. So there's some uses where we can strip out some of the vagueness, but it's not across the board. I don't think we'll ever get to that level. I just think human nature, sometimes it's just part of who we are. And I talked about hybrid intelligence. AI doesn't do too great with ambiguity. That's one of the strengths of actually a person. So the combination of human machine is probably what's going to take to reduce the level of vagueness that we have out there.
I think the important part for me is that you can't eliminate the human element in all this. And people a lot of times want to or think it's hitting a button is going to do it. And it still requires people to have discretion.
In your view, Neil, are brokerage houses that invest heavily in AI with human participation going to do much better at managing client portfolios than brokerage houses that don't?
I mean, the simple answer is yes. And then to a degree, we're already starting to see some of that. I mean, in terms of quality of service, as well as the word I'm looking for here, acceptance or happiness with the portfolio built for that client. Any other questions? I mean, please don't be shy, or if you want to ask it privately, you have my contact information, but we probably have time for maybe one or a few more questions. I don't think we have any takers, Chris, Charlotte.
Wow, a lot of quiet people today.
Lot to digest, I think.
Yeah, I know. Wait a minute, we just got one thing in the chat. It says my job is related to internal controls. Could you share some good resources on AI audit development related to internal controls?
It's not the Fed, it's the Department of Treasury. They actually have a list of suggested tools to help you ensure compliance. I don't remember the website at the top of my head. I can try and dig that up for you, and when I send out the slides, I'll also share that. But the government, the Fed, sorry, not the Fed, the Department of Treasury actually does provide some guidance on internal control tools. And I think we'll see a lot more of the other agencies, like I mentioned, the HUD and all that, will start doing the same thing. So I don't think there's a singular list out there, and I haven't seen one from Gartner specifically on internal controls. We have one for financial services as a whole, but let me see what I can find.
Thanks.